fucking Scooby-Doo, promptly fuck off, literally ripped bits of networking event, a freaky monster, child character, have an abortion, like 100 times. How well spot the difference, play in a zone of terror. Cinematic adaptations of games have pretty much always been shit. We might have had a few big budget successes recently with the likes of the Minecraft movie, Five Nights at Freddy's, the Sonic series, but generally video game movies have an unshakable stigma. But there's a trend emerging in the genre that might change all of that, and the latest example of that trend is Exit 8. Before we get too deep into it, this is a spoiler warning. We're going to talk about some stuff that wasn't in the trailer, so if you don't want the movie spoiled for you, click off now. Exit 8 is about a guy trapped in a subway station corridor in a never-ending loop of supernatural terror. The movie is based on a repetitive meme game that was released about 2 years ago, so a very quick turnaround on that one. The core premise is obviously strong. It was strong enough and intriguing enough to garner a massive fan base for the game, and obviously to make a movie you have to layer a bit more plot on top of it. The creators have opted to make the main character's internal dilemma focus on what to do about his pregnant girlfriend. She keeps asking him what he wants to do, and it's never made explicitly clear what she's asking. In the moment, I took it to mean that she was asking if she should or should not have an abortion. He doesn't seem that shaken up about the news initially, but within about half an hour of that point, he's having baby themed horror nightmares as part of the plot of the movie. So I guess it hit him pretty hard, but about half an hour in world time later, it's completely resolved for him and he seems fine with it. So maybe this guy just processes shit really fast. I get they had to add in some story to this character to make a movie work, but it does just feel shoehorned in. They're obviously limited by the fact that the entire movie kinda has to take place in this subway, so they basically have to like craft character development into a guy playing Spot the Difference for an hour. Typically, the play in a horror movie like this where someone's struggling with an internal dilemma is to make their actions and the situation they're facing in reality kind of mirror that internal dilemma, and that just really isn't happening here at all. Other than the fact there's a child present for some of his time trapped in the corridor and the weird baby themed horror monsters that appear, there isn't really any tie between the situation and his internal dilemma, other than maybe like his fear of the monotony of parenthood or family life or something. It's tenuous at best. The Exit 8 game obviously wasn't developed with the player's internal struggle in mind, so it is the fault of the filmmakers really to have picked that plotline when they could have picked anything. Other than the detached bits at the start and end, the whole fatherhood thing doesn't really play into how he handles the situation at all, because presumably it would have been nice to the kid either way. There's also a bit of a tonal mismatch between how they use the baby horror stuff and the rest of the movie. The core of the horror is the creep and dread, the not knowing what's around the next corner, the building suspense and letting it go, and at times it is very subtle. But when it comes to the baby horror, it's very in your face. It's a screaming baby. It's literally ripped bits of face climbing on the wall and crying at him. It feels like something out of a Trainspotting Come Down. Like, it's so out of place. It feels like something from a different movie. I do commend him for not fucking around and getting right into him being trapped in the corridor, which happens a few minutes into the movie. And the way they utilize the camera work at the start is like similar to the game. I thought that was really cool as well, but every time the baby stuff came up, I was just waiting for it to end so that we could see what's around the next corner. If I'm being completely honest, I would have been game to just watch him run away from fucking Scooby-Doo villains the length of the runtime until he eventually figured his way out. My main takeaway is that Exit 8 suffers from a problem that plagues horror movies almost by necessity, and that is that the characters are fucking idiots. Obviously, when most people are confronted with a ghost, demon, or some other outer-worldly phantasm, our first reaction is to turn on our heels and promptly fuck off straight out its zone of terror.
This is my zone of terror.
We wouldn't have any internal debate, we wouldn't pause to analyse its intentions or feel sympathy that it might be misunderstood. We just go, man. Your instinct handles it before logic would even kick in. But if the protagonists of horror movies acted with that degree of common sense, there just wouldn't be horror movies. So it's been on the job of the writer to give us a satisfying enough reason that the character decides to stay in the firing line. That's usually done by making them feel the need to protect some other character or save the world or save the town or prove themselves or some other shit. There's none of that here, and That's partly because we get into it so quickly, but also partly because the character kind of remains a blank slate. They don't give you any reason to feel for the guy. And in the case of Exit 8, the incredibly simple plotline where the characters are explicitly told to follow an incredibly simple list of rules means there's not a lot of wiggle room when they fail to do so. There's no ambiguity to hide behind, it's crystal fucking clear, and there's no terrifying visual of like a freaky monster or some devil character that freezes them in place. They're just dumb. The framework is simple to the point of being foolproof, so when they can't follow it, sticks out like fucking racing stripes on a hearse. You see an anomaly, you turn around, simple as fuck. But if they actually did that, they'd be out of the situation in a few minutes, and that's allowing time for them to miss small anomalies. But for the movie to actually have things happen, it requires the characters to forget the rules on a whim and act like fucking dumbasses. At one point, the obvious simulation monster fuck starts having a conversation with one of the guys, and the bookworm that he is just engages her. He just leans in like he's at a networking event and starts throwing out banter, completely forgetting that he's trapped in a supernatural reality bending nightmare. Absolute guppy on a fucking wire. Even when she starts to glitch out on live right in fucking front of him, he just waves his hand in front of her face like he's Lloyd Christmas. Bro, go! The same guy mere moments later shows that he's not smarter than the selectively mute child character when he just ignores the rules and bounces up the stairs to his demise. Moron! And the kid can talk, by the way. He talks later in the movie. He just didn't deem this guy's life valuable enough for him to open his trap. I'm not buying that this kid was terrified into mutism by something he's seen in this corridor, because he doesn't even seem scared. It's just some cheap plot device they need until they don't. I can only assume this whole happening is some form of Darwinism, where it just sucks into society's most fucking fallible ninnies and subjects them to one last chance to overcome natural selection. And I don't mean in some like thematic overarching way where their story's trying to make a point. It's just that the only thing these characters have in common is that they're all fucking brain dead. The only trait they share is that they can't follow instructions that are both clear and repeatedly reinforced. Like 100 times in the movie. By the time we're watching my man open the magical door to nowhere that's never opened before, it doesn't even feel like a horror movie anymore. It just feels like you're watching a fucking societal filtration system at work where it's sucking in the idiots, and it's not even there's not even the horror movie elements doing the heavy lifting anymore. They're just taking themselves out by sheer stupidity. This is obviously a criticism that can be leveled at so many horror movies, but the simplicity of this one just makes it so painfully obvious. And what makes it even worse for me is that it kind of goes against an idea I have about video game adaptation movies. I've developed something of a thesis that video game adaptation movies can only be good, or at least not bad, if the video game they're adapting is basically void of plot to begin with. This year we've had adaptations of both Exit 8 and Iron Lung, two video games where you control a nameless, faceless character who doesn't speak, who's trapped in a single simple location the entire time. These projects essentially just give filmmakers an already proven concept to build an interesting story on top of. Even the Minecraft movie falls into this category to an extent, and while I'm not exactly holding up a foam finger for these flicks, they are feeding spoonfuls of dust to the likes of Doom, Hitman, Assassin's Creed, Silent Hill. I think having less to go on in a sense takes the onus off of just simply how well a game can adapt into a movie and puts it a bit more on the team behind it to craft an interesting movie with little more to go on than a one-sentence prompt and a few visual cues. Games with dense narratives aren't just telling stories the same way a movie does. They're telling those stories distributed amongst sometimes over 100 missions, environments, little side quests, loads of different details. And all of those things require their own internal story arcs. Missions in games aren't just isolated things go from here to here. All of those missions typically have their own story arcs as well. When you compile all of that into a 2-hour movie, you're not so much adapting it as you are amputating it. The filmmakers have to strip away all the choice, completely rebuild the pacing, and remove hundreds of hours of content that might be your favourite bit. The end result is usually something that feels somehow overstuffed and also completely hollow. And it doesn't help that it's usually done by people who don't even really know what they're adapting. By contrast, something like Exit 8 or Iron Lung doesn't pretend to offer a fully articulated narrative in the first place. You can't disappoint fans by not adapting their favourite favorite aspect, because you've just got the basic mechanic and kind of the environment to go on. The appeal of these games isn't some deep immersion to the story and connection to the characters like you might get from something like Prince of Persia. So it's a lot harder to disappoint people who are already fans of the IP because there's less to fail to adapt well. The filmmaker isn't competing with the game's narrative identity, because in many cases there isn't one. That freedom shifts the evaluative lens. Success or failure lands squarely on the execution and not just how well it adapts or mirrors a pre-written storyline. Instead of having to take a machete to all the content to decide what gets kept, what gets cut, what gets changed, the team behind something like Exit 8 can instead just build a story on top of an already simple outline, and that's a far more appealing prospect for any creative. It's almost always going to result in something that feels more like it was made with passion and less like a soulless cash grab. I suppose the advantage to these more sparse abstract game adaptations isn't necessarily that it's easier to do well, but it's just harder to get wrong in the same way. With less pre-existing story, it's harder for it to collapse on its own weight, and it can instead kind of stand on its merits a bit more. So was Exit 8 good? I mean, it was alright. It's an hour and a half long, so it's not exactly a massive time investment, and they easily could have made the mistake of dragging it out longer. I'm a real sucker for high concept movies, and I really like isolation movies as well, so I was well positioned to like this one. And while there were bits of it that I did like, it let itself down quite a lot, namely in the kind of undercooked fatherhood plotline and in the characters being just so fucking stupid. If you like the game, you'll definitely get a kick out of seeing it on the big screen. If you've never heard of the game, it's probably worth catching for the more kind of interesting, unique elements, but just don't be expecting anything amazing.